So, hello, this is the thing about cars. Welcome. We are back in the recording studio after a small unintentional hiatus. Around the table, we have a full crew today. It's a rather full table. Dave, sir, how are you? Dave Polly.
Apparently small and unintentional.
And Ben, how goes it, Ben?
It goes pretty fantastic. How about you?
I'm glad to hear that it's going fantastic. It's going semi-fantastic here. It's great in my world. Trivia czar Tim is with us. Trivia. Tim, how goes it?
It's doing very well, very intentional, very tall.
It's very intentionally my fault.
No, very intentional and very tall.
Oh, I would
Sure,
thought you
rub
were,
it in.
yeah. And all the way from the Netherlands, where apparently there was some flooding recently. Misty, how are you?
Um, Not as moist as I was earlier today. Very tanned and living a semi-charmed kind of life.
That's awesome. Did you have any flooding in your area, or did you escape
No,
all that?
nah, it bucketed a little earlier here, but my living room is still 25 degrees Celsius, which is, I think,
Oh,
horrendous.
yeah, that is it. So our special guests for today are a pair of folks that Ben has met. We have Geoff Hacker and Mike Puma who do this thing called Undiscovered Classics. Ben, how did you find these guys?
Well, I first saw an article about undiscovered classics in Classic Motorsport, a magazine I read a lot of, and I thought these guys sound really cool, and we need to have them on and talk about what they do.
So, Geoff, Mike, welcome to the show. Glad to see you're both here. Mike, let's get a voice ID on Jeff's voice. Say hello, Geoff.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So,
Yes. And Mike, how goes it, Mike?
It goes great. Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys are both here. So did Ben just write to you? Did you just get a phone call from this stranger who said, "Hey, I want you to be on my podcast"?
well, he showed up on my doorstep and he waited for 3 days. I don't like to answer the phone. Sometimes I go up on the second floor and shout at people. So after the third day, I talked to Mike and I said, okay, what do we do with Ben? And so
He's got a certain
That's
Ben
good,
is a
Jeff, because
constant.
after 4 days he resorts to a hostage situation.
He's not that
Ben
smart,
was
but he's tenacious. Yeah.
Ben's a consummate gentleman. Reach out via email and like normal. And it was very fun talking with him. And I think we did mostly email at first. I usually switch to phone, though, after that.
yeah.
I'm 61, so now I can stop using technology. That's just wonderful.
Is that what happens? Because I'm leaning towards more phone time myself, and I'm not aware of why. So maybe that's just it.
Well, it's I don't know, it's a great excuse, because what happens is I'm very good with computers and I'm somewhat good with phones. God knows what's going to happen with AI. So pretty soon you can reach me via pager or a payphone. I'll have
Yes.
a payphone probably here. So one of the two.
That's perfect. Perfect. So, Mike, Geoff, please tell us about Undiscovered Classics. I've been through the website. There's some really amazing stuff here, but I don't want to steal your thunder. Tell us about the site.
Well, we'll give two versions, and it'll be short. You need to. I can talk for a long time. Mike's better at being brevity, and so it's please free to cut us off or have me be more cogent as we go. But Undiscovered Classics really evolved from something called Forgotten Fiberglass, which was my organization I started with a buddy named Rick DeLuey in about 2006 or seven. But it was for fun, and it always has been for fun underneath it all. But really, it was to celebrate hand-built cars. That's the best way, hand-built cars in America. And I've had my first hand-built car was a concept car, actually, called the Shark. I still have it. It's had it bought in 2019. So I've stopped doing math at age 61 as well. So however many years it is from 2019 to now, that's how long I've had the car. And that's debuted at Amelia Island in 2013. It's been on Jay Leno. Actually, Jay Leno's garage, last time I checked, it was about 650,000 views, which is
Wow.
quite a bit for that car. Yeah, we've got the whole key is when everything, all the concept and all the dream and all the sports and all the interesting cars that Detroit was building for all of us, all four of us, from the Netherlands, from across America, all the people back in the 50s were looking at, they all went out in the 50s after World War II and started designing and building their own in the 60s, but mostly the 50s. And that's the incredible part. We have over 100 magazine covers showing hand-built cars in the 1950s and how big of a event it was. Virtually forgotten today. That's Undiscovered Classics brings forward people's dreams that they were building, not custom cars, but actually hand-built, usually all original sports cars and some concept cars. And we've dabbled in a few custom cars too that we could talk about. But custom cars is a kind of a little bit different, but it is related to what we do. These are really original sports cars, and I could give many examples. So hand-built celebrated cars that were as famous as the cars being created by Detroit, the concept and show cars. That's what we do, and we're bringing that forward again, and to great success on the playing field. In 5 weeks, I have a whole class of these cars at Pebble Beach. 9 cars on the field, 3 or 4 of which I used to own, and 4 or 5 additional ones that are friends of mine, people. And we just got done, I think, Mike, with a class in Amelia this year, didn't we? Yeah, just a few months ago, with another class, Fiberglass Dreams. Not all fiberglass all the time.
Yeah.
So a little longer. It celebrates hand-built cars. If Detroit and the 3 companies were building 10, America built 100, and actually they built 1,000. And because our collection right now is scaling it back a little bit, but we just went over 100 cars in our collection, and we're bringing it down now a bit.
That's
too many cars.
I have a question for Mike, and then I'm going to be quiet and let my colleagues chip in with their questions. But Mike, what separates well, I guess it's a 2-part question. One, what drives this pursuit for you, and what separates these cars from the other kind of hand-built cars like rat rods, hot rods, stuff like that?
Sure. I guess what drives the pursuit for me is that I've been a car guy my whole life, and I'm in my early 30s now. And I would say probably about at least 5 years ago, I kind of started to get a little bit bored with the hobby. Not to say that I still didn't enjoy classic cars, but I was just like, how many more issues of Mopar action can I read about some rare, obscure 68 Charger? Or like, how many more times am I going to see a Mustang on the cover of Hot Rod? Like, there's got to be more out there. And in my day job, I work in historic preservation. So it's kind of this great intersection of digging up old history related to untold or little known stories about buildings or people, and that translates really well to my interest in the hobby. So what kind of kicked it off for me is I was scrolling through eBay one day. I had a proximity list set up about 200 miles within my hometown, Buffalo, within certain year range, and I check it every day. You know how it is. If you have old cars, you're always looking for the next one, or in Jeff's case, the next several dozen. So I found one that came across, and it said the title was 1959 Other Makes. I was like, okay, that's a weird category, but whatever. And I looked at the photo and go, what the hell is that thing? So I'm reading through the description, and it's about one sentence, and it says 1959 Ladawri Conquest, General Electric prototype electric car. And I'm like, okay, I know cars pretty well. I don't know all of the obscure ones and the European ones and the coach-built ones, but I could kind of recognize them. What the hell is a Ladawri, and why have I never heard of it? So, of course, I did what anybody else would do, Google it. Jeff's website came up, and I was like, oh my God, this is the obsessive rabbit hole that I've been looking for, because I am just, this is it. This is exactly what I want. And I ended up buying that car. I actually lost the auction, but I built up such a rapport with the sellers that thankfully the winning bidder ghosted them after about a month, and I had said to them, hey, I hope it all goes well with the sale, hope it goes smoothly, but if they disappear, I'm still a buyer. And about a month later, they disappeared, and thank God they did, because they were going to rip out everything in the car and put it on a Corvette chassis, which is not the wrong thing to do, because these cars go really well on C2, C1, C3 chassis. It was the wrong thing to do for this car, because it retained everything General Electric put into it for this experimental electric hybrid car. And it came with about 3 old school phone books worth of documentation. And it really had everything in it but the batteries. And thankfully, a friend of mine who I had work on some of my other cars, he's an electrical wizard. I think his dad did automotive electrics as well. He's about twice my age, in his late 60s, I think now, mid 60s. George, if you're listening, I'm sorry if I aged you older than you are. But I'll give you the accolades. Electrical genius, right? So I called him up and I said, hey, I got this thing. I drained the gas tank. I dropped the gas tank and I had it reconditioned. I am now at the end of my skills, because I'm looking at all of these relays and switches and this Frankenstein panel of wires and electric drive motors and all this crazy stuff. I'm like, how do you feel about taking on a project? So he was enamored with it. He was just as obsessed about it as I was. And it just came off pretty much a year-long mechanical and electrical restoration. And George got it fully functional for the first time since 1961, when it was taken off the road. So he did an amazing job with it. And that's what kicked it all off. And I just kept harassing Geoff long enough for him to think that I was serious enough to be involved in the enterprise. And here we are. Now I run all the social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, now Threads. We're on there and we have a pretty good following already. So, and I've just been accumulating more of these really unique and cool hand-built American sports cars of the post-war era.
Very cool. That is very
Yeah.
cool. Ben, you guys take it away. What can we learn from our guests?
Well, Geoff, how'd you get started on this?
Is my video still there?
No.
I don't know what happened to it or not, but
Yeah.
you can hear me okay.
We can hear you. Yeah. How did you get started on this path?
God, without being boring, 1976 or so, I was 14. And I've always loved old cars. My mom is the old car person. Actually, she corresponded with George Romney to help save a Hudson back in when she was going to college in the late 50s. It was kind of interesting. It was George Romney, Mitt Romney's father. And she always supported the idea of old cars. And I was 14 years old. I got a 1955 Cadillac Fleetwood and started working on that. And we were in Chicago, and I started working on it, learning how to do things and getting it running and restoring and so forth. By the time I was in high school, graduate from high school, it was all restored. We moved to Florida, and I found this really cool car called the Shark. If your guests want to look it up, it's called 1962 Shark Roadster LT Braun. Put my name in, you'll see it. And it looked like a spaceship had landed 100 years ago and crash landed. It was a futuristic car, which looked like it had been almost destroyed behind some house. And I begged the owners. I was going my way to work. I would stop by and look at it. It's a really neat car. I knew about old cars at the time. This was completely different. And over 6 months or a year, they were nice with me, but it was never for sale. Finally, I looked at an Auto Trader one day, and there it was for sale. And I went down and was able to offer all the money I had. They had a buyer, but I said, well, I can only offer everything, which is $500. I think it was either $350 or $500. I still have the bill of sale. And the whole story is up on our website, too. So I got that when I was 19 years old. I had it restored in about 2 years. And I've kept it for those 40-some years until now. We restored it in 2013 to a lot of fun and then debuted it on the world stage at Amelia Island Concourse, which is a pretty big place. And Auto Week did a video on it, and Jay Leno's Garage. It's up on Jay Leno's Garage, too. And there's some more videos and there's stories about it. And that was my first car. The first one in terms of hand-built car. So somewhere around 2006 or 7, they made 6 convertibles and 6 hardtops. I was looking for the hardtops, 2005 or 6. I found the hardtop version via eBay via a friend. And when the hardtop came in, from 1984 was when I found my second Shark to 2005. I was now in the 40s, and I wanted to learn more about what fiberglass cars were all about. And so when that car came in, that kind of started that going down the path. So by 2005, my research into fiberglass cars had started. I found a site called ladawri.com and started becoming friends with some people who were into vintage fiberglass cars. And what I had found was that there was very little research into this area of these hand-built cars from the 50s and 60s. A lot of people had comments, and a lot of people had a little bit of knowledge here and there. But over the next almost 20 years, we put together a whole community and a whole group and collectors and shows and events and articles. The article you found, Classic Motorsports, was published in January 2022. That was the 7th article about what we do in major magazines over the last 15 years. We've been in Tom Cotter's books, 4 or 5 of his books. And that message of not just with the Shark, I have, like I said, we usually restore about a car every year or two. And then we try to help people restore their cars in terms of providing parts or knowledge and experience. And then we track down all the people. We were friends with a lot of the folks who built the cars in the 50s and 60s. Sadly, most of them have passed now. But 93-year-old Merrill Powell and I will be part of a forum in 5 weeks at Pebble Beach talking about dream cars, which is it's Dream Cars of America, which are hand-built cars of America that these people were building across the country. Just fabulous designs. A lot of these people went on to, if anyone has enough initiative to design a car and build a car, you probably have the energy and tenacity to have a pretty wild career, a successful career. And virtually all these people went on to amazing careers. Guy named Noel Bangert was the talent he turned into after he finished his cars about 50 of them in the 50s, he turned into a talent scout, talent agent, and married Tippi Hedren, who was the actress in the Hitchcock movie Birds. And
wow.
he became, and he actually was the executive producer of another older movie, The Exorcist. And when I met him, he was living on a small yacht, houseboat, or whatever, in Marina del Rey. I think it's a place in Los Angeles. It was on a big, beautiful open. And I mean, wild people. Chuck Pelly, who was doing small Victress bodies, was a famous BMW design group now. Bob Gurr is another person. He went on to a career working for Disney. He's one of the last Imagineer left. He'll be joining us on the panel too. So these people were remarkable people, and the story was untold about these people, their cars, their designs. Even the car that Mike was talking about, the Ladawri, I tracked down the people, Les Dawes and Joan Dawes. That was the husband and wife team that created the company along with Don Wright. And we've had several Ladawris over the years. I think I still have one. Do I have one, Mike? Yeah, I do. You're getting that one. You're getting another conquest. Yeah.
Yep.
So in some cases, I sell cars. In some cases, we restore cars. In some cases, I gift cars. In some cases, it's not all cars. It's all these hand-built cars. And if you spend time on the website, you'll see what I mean. They're all unique and original, and usually they've just made one or two at most. It's amazing many are left, you know?
It's just amazing. It's total eye candy. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally agreed. I guess since you've spoken with so many of these, original designers, and you said that, so many of them have gone on to lead really interesting lives. What would you say was the defining character trait that all of these people shared?
Well, one was kind of the sports cars in America after World War II story. You often hear that after World War II, Americans came home and they wanted to drive sports cars. They saw them all in Europe. It's kind of a misnomer, but the fact that they came, World War II was over, America had a success. There was a slight recession when all the people came back in 46 and 7. It took a little while for America to kind of get the gears moving again. But what it didn't take going is the I can do it, we can do it attitude. And that's the defining characteristic, is being able to set forth, I can design something, I can build something. Time magazine in 1955 ran an entire article called The Do-It-Yourself Phenomenon. It was their front page article. And they talked about cars too, and houses. It was kind of to me, the start of Home Depot and Lowe's and all those things that came before it, about, going to being able to purchase all the stuff that you need to and building the stuff that you want, or repairing it. Something that we've gotten away from somewhat. Working with your hands is less and less common than it was back in the 50s. So I can do it. I can build it. When I asked some of the guys about how did you shorten the frame for a car, they said, because I have Milwaukee saws and tools with 18-volt, great. It would take a lot of work. He says, oh, we used a handsaw. So a handsaw for a frame of a 1950s car, he said, well, it took usually a week or so. We would kind of cut it down and so forth. Yeah. And so we just worked on it longer. And I've got pictures of all these people working on these cars, and it's inspirational in terms of the amount of effort they would do to complete them. And a lot of people never completed the cars, and many people did. And it was magazines would cover these as front cover stories. And you'll see that if you go into our website, how not common, but how celebratory they were, and how exciting. And people would come to these shows to see these cars. And then when you put on fiberglass, everyone talks down about fiberglass. Fiberglass is just a composite. It's no different than carbon fiber. These fiberglass cars, when I say no different in terms of plastic material that's fluid and holds a shape and so forth. So we think about a carbon fiber car like the new Bugattis or whatever, some of you know with those, whatever the new carbon fiber cars are. And people are attracted to them for all the right reasons. Well, that's what fiberglass was in the 50s, the new wonder material. Yep. And the first small production runs were in 1951 and 2. In fact, in 51, the Glasspar, the Wasp, Scorpion, and Lancer were out. Those were the first 4 cars. And in 52, there was about another 25 cars. And in 53, when the Corvette came out, there was another 20 cars. And all those companies were in operation through about 55 or 6. So when the Corvette came out and you could buy it in the fall of 53, that's when they became available in small numbers. There were already about 50 sports cars that you could buy in America that were being built. And in our collection, we have 35 of them. So
it's just amazing.
Oh,
yeah,
mostly fiberglass. fiberglass is easier to work with. We do have some aluminum and steel. I'm just thinking, Mike and I were moving cars today. I think the only sports cars we were moving around were the fiberglass ones. That was the most common. Took a lot of work. It took the average person to build one of these cars. If you got a production body, took 2,000 hours to build it. If you got the body, another 1,000 or more if you had to create and design and build your own body. But 2,000 hours in human resource terms, if you're an HR person, is 50 weeks of 40-hour weeks with 2 weeks off for a full year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you do the math at $50 an hour, that's $100,000 in labor in any of these cars. So these were extraordinary efforts to be celebrated. And finally, actually, it wasn't really hard to convince the major magazines from Rada's Journal and Classic and Sports. Mick Walsh is the editor over there in the UK, and Gasoline over in Europe. And I mean, we've been in all the magazines. It's not that we're famous. The cars are famous. Our job is to show the story and let them and help people like you and others to celebrate the story. Because like Mike said, a lot of people, I have a 59 Caddy, but I've known the story on the 59 Caddy for 59 years, but all these cars like the 1949 Packard Monte Carlo or the Frazier Custom 555 or the Victress S4, all these are new to people. And it's exciting to kind of bring in something new in the car hobby that's not, for me, that's old. The palette is wide and diverse, and the designs are both beautiful and awful. So it's fun, just like Detroit. Detroit created some beautiful concept cars and some horrific ones. Same variety. Yeah.
Dave, have you got a question for our guests?
It's interesting. Well, first off, it's an observation because I am deep into the website. And what I love about this is not only the breadth but the depth of vehicles and discussions we're talking about. And the one that I've kind of just fixated on for the last few minutes is the fantastic Ferber fiberglass RV.
It's actually not. It's not. It's even better than you think, but it's actually aluminum. So.
Oh, is it? Is aluminum? Well, I'm so taken aback with it because it really looks like the mystery machine from Scooby-Doo.
Fantastic. All right, so let me back. That's another hand-built one. I'm friends with the Ferber family. I have a friend who's a songwriter, and I hired him to create 10 Ferber family songs for when we finish that car. It's like a big shoebox that you drive around, and what I love about that particular one, and is the fact that non-existent was the most expensive RV you could buy in the 1970s, and no one knows anything about it, including the RV Museum in Elkhart, Indiana. I gave all the information on it. It was magazines back in the day, and but let me paint a broader picture that might be more interesting to your listeners. We tracked down all hand-built vehicles, so I had 5 RVs that were hand-built ones. 3 of them were called Ultravans, so those small production ones. I think I just bought another one. I just had to pick it up. I didn't tell you that, Mike. But when I had like 3 or 4, I wrote a story. I said, I didn't know. I guess I collect RVs. I don't really I look at what the kind of car represents. So we have 2 prototype RVs, and I don't know how many people collect RVs. I didn't know people, maybe they don't or do, but we evidently do. And we have something called the Executive from John Bucci. We have 2 of John's 5 cars that he built in the 60s and 70s. And it went on a world tour. I've got pictures of this RV being picked up and put on the Queen Elizabeth or Queen Mary, I think it was the Queen Elizabeth, and being over by Big Ben in Europe. And it was a show truck done in the 70s, which just cantilevered over the front axle, where you sit over the front axle. Not all that unusual, I guess, with RVs.
It had a fireplace in it.
Yeah,
many other crazy features.
Yes. And it was used by Studio 54. And how do you know that? Well, just read the articles in the New York Times. John was a friend of mine before he passed away, and he gave me all the information. And then I got the car from his estate. And they would use this in Studio 54 after it would close down, whatever time in the morning, 2 or 3. And they would continue with some of their VIP guests hitting the road around Manhattan in the 70s. John was from Chicago, and if you know the history of the Playboy Mansion started in Chicago, and that's where he actually became friends with them all. And so his car didn't go to California, but it actually went to New York and across Europe and so forth. So I collect RVs. What else do we have, Mike? We have, the sports cars, fiberglass sports cars. I have teardrop cars. streamliners that were hand built in the 30s. The 1937 Goujon streamliner looks like a Dymaxion. I was always fascinated with teardrop cars, and I always didn't think we could find that. I've got two now that we have found. Actually, I found more. It's just how many can you acquire?
Oh, quick plug for the Goujon with the Dymaxion mentioned. Geoff knew Buckminster Fuller.
Well, my family, my mom and dad did down when he was a teacher in Southern Illinois University. And so I actually met him when I was a tiny guy. But my parents were fascinated with him. They helped build geodesic domes when Bucky was, we call Bucky Fuller is what the students call him. And there are some of those being restored now in Carbondale, Illinois, which is Southern Illinois University. And I was always fascinated with the Dymaxion, a big tubular car. And if any of you look up 1937 Goujon, we have Goujon streamliners and RVs and sports cars. And I have the Moon Transporter. If any of the folks on the panel know what the Moon Transporter is, it's America's most famous race car transporter from the 60s, late 50s. It carried the very first Cobra that came over from Europe. I just learned this in one of the friends sent a book in. I think it's called Wildfire by Carroll Shelby. And Dean Moon and Carroll Shelby went to wherever they picked up the car, and it was transported on the Moon Transporter. If any of you look it up online, you'll see it's another cantilever car, all aluminum, done by Troutman and Barnes. Jim Hall's Chaparral 1 took its maiden voyage to Riverside Raceway. So we have a transporter in our collection. We've got another thing called Sport Customs, which were two-seater larger sports cars that people were building. So we're doing a Sport Custom class, it looks like next year at Amelia, where these cars will debut. And people were building all these things. You know, by the 60s, it kind of got toned down, and people were building more conventional things where kits were available. In the 50s, at the best, you just got a body and you spent a year building the whole thing if you finished it. Yeah, very tough. We have some concept cars and show cars too. We are moving we have the oldest Packard show car in the world. It was missing for 70 years. I found it a few years ago. 1949 Packard Monte Carlo Super 8 convertible done by Richard Arbib and Henny for Packard as a concept. And I have what's considered to be potentially the most beautiful Cord Phaeton in the world. It was stretched by a coach builder in the post-war years and repowered with something Chrysler at this point, and stretched 2 feet. So if you can imagine a Cord Phaeton and all the work it would take, that's a unibody car too. They built the whole frame underneath it to do this.
That's amazing, just amazing. Mike,
if I look up, I hope I don't bore you too much, but all these different cars.
No, Mike, how many of these do you get to drive?
Well, let's see. What did I drive today? I got to move the 1957 Galileo Special, which is moving into its next phase of restoration. Prior to that, I got to back out, and I've taken it around the block before, the 1954 Frazier Custom, which I don't know that many people my age could say that they know how to drive 3 on the tree, let alone have something memorable they learned it on. So I learned how to drive 3 on the tree on the 54 Frazier Custom, which is a wild car. I actually just parked it next to Geoff's 59 Caddy this morning. That was today's Instagram post. I mean, a lot of them driving is more like navigating, you know. Not many of them run, and those that could run, we tend to just push around. The Devin that we just picked up this morning, that's pretty close to being roadworthy. I think we just have to pick up the gas tank that was redone and install that, and that thing is a running and driving viable car. So I've got my 59 Conquest, which is almost roadworthy. It's so original, it has the tires on it from 1961, so they are in immaculate condition, but it sat in the same spot for 60 plus years, so they might as well be square tires when you try to get any movement out of it. So I've got to replace that and get it a little bit tuned up. I've got a Ladawri Sebring, which is a very similar look to the Conquest, but shorter and narrower, meant for like an MG chassis, whereas the Conquest is more suited. It's on a Henry J chassis, but it could just as easily go on a Corvette chassis, just to give you some perspective on scale there. What else do I have? I've got a 1961 Victress C2, which is technically a Ladawri Sicilian, because Ladawri purchased Victress and then continued producing their cars under different monikers. Everything was identical. They made some improvements to them, but visually and design-wise, they didn't mess with them. I have the buck and the molds for the 1961 Bohada, which is a Buffalo built and designed sports car from the era, which will eventually be coming down here, and we'll hopefully be making a couple of those in the near future. There's 3 of them out there in one form or another. I've got a 1958 Victress C3, which is down here, built, I think, originally by a guy in Cleveland, which Geoff, of course, acquired. And that's going to be going on a Corvette chassis. The chassis that's under it is a 1951 Chevy. It might as well be a farm truck. I mean, it's just, and it's shot. So Geoff knew the original builder of the car, and kind of have their blessing to say, you know, if we had this available at the time, we would have put this thing on a Corvette chassis. It's even got a C1, early C2 Corvette grill in it. So it kind of ties it all together. I think that's it. And whatever Geoff is sending me home with, he keeps threatening me the longer I stay. It's 2 cars today. Tomorrow it's 3 cars. So I got to get out of here before I end up with 30 of these things.
Oh, wow. That's a problem I think all of us would like to have. You know,
Yeah.
we have a deep, very deep level of empathy for your apparently torturous and painful situation.
Oh, it's just brutal. It's awful.
Not.
I think Tim
wow,
has a
that was
question.
a lot of sarcasm that was pent up.
Yeah.
If I could comment on a
Usually it
couple-
just dribbles out all through the show.
Hold on, Jeff.
Sorry.
Hold on, Jeff. I want to hear this comment, but I believe Tim has had a question for a while now.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of these cars were built in the early 50s through early 60s. Was there a most popular formula of what frame and mechanicals, powertrains that would be used during that time?
Geoff probably has a lot of good examples, but I'm going to jump ahead of him here because I've been working on my own phraseology. So when I try to explain what these cars are, because people will automatically go, oh, it's a kit car. It's like, well, no, it's not a kit car. As Geoff pointed out, if it is a kit car, it's the worst kit car ever because you just got a body, as opposed to the more ubiquitous kit cars of the 60s or 70s, where pretty much everything showed up and you had detailed instruction manuals, and it really wasn't anywhere near as complicated as trying to figure out how to put these things together. I've tried to contextualize it. Everybody knows what a resto mod is in the hobby, you know, older car, newer drivetrain, maybe even a newer chassis. These are almost like the reverse of that. They're reverse resto mod, right? You have a sporty body, but only available to you in era is an older platform to put it on. So it's a great way to have something that was sportier looking, sometimes performing in a sporty fashion, but a lot of times going on cars that we wouldn't necessarily consider the origin of as sporty, like say a shoebox Ford, for example. But Geoff, you probably have a pretty good idea on what a lot of the chassis selection and drivetrain uses were. I know they're kind of all over the place.
Well, not really. They're mostly Ford. To the person who was asking, mostly Ford. But to do that, you have to modify it. So Glasspar came out in 51, and they wanted to sell more bodies. Glasspar was a boat company, and 85% of their business was boat, and they used the same high-level approach to create their cars and car bodies. And Bill Tripp was a friend of mine. He passed away when he was 88, about 10 years ago. And so he said initially what they did was they were putting them on the first 2 or 3 on Willys chassis that were pre-war. Willys pre-war were full-body cars on chassis. Post-war, they were unibody. So you couldn't really do that, use some components. And those were 102-inch wheelbase cars they were using with pre-war, the first couple. They were all trying to emulate the wheelbase of the XK120 Jaguar, which is 102 inches. And interestingly, they brought it down to about 99 inches. So what Glasspar came up with is to show you how to modify a frame so that you could modify a Ford frame, which would have been a shoebox or earlier, most likely earlier, 39 to 48 prior to the shoebox. Ford shoebox is 49, 50, 51, and it has independent front suspension and longitudinal springs. In like starting at 39 to 48, they were hydraulic brakes or juice brakes, some of the guys will call them. And then you had a straight axle up front and a straight axle, a buggy spring in the back, one spring in the front. Very basic. And you could buy those cars for $25. So you could build like a Victress or a Glasspar for hundreds of dollars, which still was some money back then. But they would typically use Ford because there were so many Fords available from the 40s at very little money. Very rarely did we see a car like the C3 Victress that Mike has, that's built on a modified Chevy frame. But even with the Ford chassis, you had to Z it or lower it in the center. So you had to change a wheelbase that was around 112 inches to about 99 or 102. So that's why I said earlier, how did you actually modify a chassis? You had to get a hacksaw out and do that, or however they would cut it. And then they would gusset it or strengthen it and make that center part lower. Companies started in 52 like a company called Mameco starting to build chassis just for these kinds of cars, a build-it-yourself car. And they did a beautiful job building them with a lowered center, 99-inch wheelbase. And two guys, Ted Mangles and Ed Martindale, one of those guys was friends of mine, the other had passed away before you had a chance to talk to him. And they had brochures and they made carbon chassis for, this was all out in California and almost all in the Los Angeles area. So all these people knew each other. They were building these cars, and the chassis guys, even Frank Curtis was building a chassis called the KK500. And some of those chassis went into their cars, and also Victruses and Glasspars and Allieds and other cars like that too. But that's another things that we kind of skipped over. And that's it was like this Forbes magazine, Nation's Business magazine wrote 2 articles about Little Detroit, and that was Costa Mesa, California, where bulk of these companies were, Glasspar and Lancer. And so you could drive around when California and Los Angeles wasn't as crowded as it is now. And Wildfire was there, and Grantham Stardust and Meteor, and all of these companies were probably within a 20-mile, maybe 30-mile diameter. And so you could modify things quickly, learn, and there were people building chassis for the cars being built and so forth. So Ford components, or you could buy a pre-built chassis right from Victrus or Glasspar or Wildfire. And those were the big companies, those 3 from 1951 to 57. Then it became Ladawri and Devin and Bocar and Kellison in the late 50s. And then there was a ton of small companies that just made it fascinating. Maverick and Grantham Stardust and Allied and others ones. And there was something, someone started talking about the Ferber. And that's the comment I wanted to add, if that would be okay with you.
Sure.
The Ferber has a fantastic story, and I'll shorten it. In their brochure, they talked about, and I love the Ferber, the big square box made out of aluminum, because RVs in the 60s and 70s were all fiberglass. And here comes this company building one out of aluminum. And why? And they wanted to build the best RV that had ever been built. And it was 10 grand in 1969 for the empty shell. And then they moved it to 20,000. And in their 4-page brochure, they talk about the first one that they sold was in for repairs on a trip. And during the repair, the family was in the car, in the RV, and somehow it slipped into gear. And it went through the cinder block wall of the repair shop. This is in their brochure. And everyone was safe, and the kids were safe, and only one of the windows needed replaced. And because it's flat glass, not only is our car safe, but because it's flat glass, you can repair it on the road. And it's like watching the old commercials from the UHF or, after 11 p.m. It's wonderful to see how small independent companies were operating and how they were putting forward excellent examples, but it's not so polished. It's like watching a NASCAR race from the 60s as opposed to 2023. Much more entertaining and much more creative. Everyone's polished and politically correct and so forth. And the stories about these cars are fantastic and amazing, and how they if you've watched the Tucker movie about how Tucker was presented on opening day and all the excitement around all of these cars, stories about how they made it to the show, like the Peterson Motorama, or if it was being prepped for the Bonneville. Like 2 of these cars were the Victrus S1 and the Allied Coupe were the world's fastest cars at Bonneville in 1953, and what went into making them that. It's the stories about the cars that we're trying to preserve. The car by itself can be a beautiful shape, and then you move forward, but it's the stories like the Ferber brochures and driving through walls that give it a soul. And we're saving the personalities and the souls of these companies by grabbing the stories from the people and traveling the country for many years, talking to them individually. I wish I did more videos. I did more audio recordings. As you can tell from today, I'm in Zoom. I'm an audio person, not a video person. So, but saving the stories and getting them passed on. Our website has more than 1,000 stories and 1,000 pages, and we're just getting started. The
That's
website
crazy.
has about 10% of the collection of things that we've been able to share so far, but we're looking forward to getting books out in the next 10 years. We've done about 10 books right now. If you go and search for books, they're all free. You can download all the books.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm actually sitting here looking at one of your books, and the one
cool.
thing that I'm noticing, and I'm a complete car person. I mean, I grew up in a garage. I used to do my own tune-ups on my 78 Toyota Corolla. I'm small enough I'd have to brace my knees on the bumper to, tighten down the oil pan plug. But what I'm noticing,
Cool.
especially on like the Voodoo and the Glasspar and the Woodill, over the headlights, they have that same curve that my 2016 MX-5 has.
Hmm.
It's that same, that same front
Design element.
design. Yeah. And I think, and I love how that seems to be coming back, because I'm not, like I said, I mean, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and I actually learned to drive in an 80 something Subaru station wagon, 5-speed with 4-wheel drive in a cow pasture, because I'm from extreme North Georgia. Although I did spend many summers in Tampa, I grew up in the Clearwater area.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, my two of my aunts actually graduated from Largo High School.
Oh, I
So
graduated from Dunedin High School, just a little
yeah,
north of there. So,
but I've always been, I'm a car girl, and but just seeing the more classic body styles starting to kind of come back, that just warms the cockles of my cold black little heart.
well, you're looking at our books too, and what we're trying to do. Mike has seen this as well, and the people who are part of our organization. In celebrating these stories and what they accomplished, you have to show the beautiful design or artwork. And most of the stuff back down, now in 2000, whatever it is, 23, people have art. If it's a Ferrari or a Porsche, there's art all over the place, art, beautiful photography. But like we have so many cars that we found that still haven't, there's no restored example of a Victress S4. There's only 2 examples of a Victress S5. There may only been 5 or 6 built. So one of my friends, we're doing this about 20 years together, Dan Palatnik. I have a whole page dedicated to the art of Dan Palatnik. Dan is thrilled about working on cars and bringing to life things that people, he has a strong client base of all the cars that are out there. But we bring him cars like the Allard Clipper, if anyone does the Allard Clipper. The Allard Clipper is a fiberglass car. It was one of the first fiberglass cars built, and it's a micro car, kind of, those big damn thing. And they built like 5 or 6, only 2 are known to exist. Well, we found a third one in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's in Hemmings. Any of these things, you'll see Hemmings covers this quite a bit. And we asked Dan to put together artwork for these cars so that people when we do the books can appreciate them, not just pictures of unrestored cars or as found or hopefully restored, but also beautiful art images. And the books should be replete with those, I hope, if I've done my right job here. And we've done posters of the cars, and you can download it. There's nothing you can buy from us unless you really, really want to, maybe a car. But all the stuff I'm mentioning is all free. Download it. And people can pay us to print the books, but I would pay them almost not to. Take them to your printer. My job and our job and Mike's job is to celebrate the cars and get these lost stories out there. And we've had tremendous success with the museums. We've got a Peterson Museum opened up exhibit called Sports Cars of the Future that I worked with them to create about a year ago. It just opened up in May, 2 months ago, I guess. And we're taking a car from Pebble Beach. It's called the Le Mans Coupe. It's on our front page. It's a car that was designed in '58 and hasn't been seen since 1960. It'll make its world debut in Pebble Beach in next month, I guess. And it'll go right from there to the Peterson Museum. So we've had wonderful success with getting people to celebrate the stories and the cars and their history. And now I'm getting ready to try to get more books out so that people can read them, and you'll be able to download them all for free. Who wants to pay for a book for a car that they've never heard of?
Right.
But
we actually have a publisher contact if we want to talk about that later. But we are rapidly running out of time. Does anyone have a last question for Mike or Geoff before we wrap the show? I have one question, but I'm afraid it's going to be too long. But how about it, gang? You got anything?
I don't have a question, but I do just want to say from the cockles of my cold black heart, thank you. This is, that there's so much of America that is tied up in cars. It's such an integral part of our identity as Americans, and to see all of these, just basically children of these, amazing people's imagination, and to bring their stories to light and to bring the cars themselves back to life. I think that's, you have earned a place in history, and a very well-deserved one. And thank you both.
It's very kind of you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for saying kind and not nice, because otherwise I would have to disabuse you of that notion.
Bless your heart.
Oh, Dave, bless your
my,
heart, doll baby.
my last question, and this may be too nosy. Tell me I'm being too nosy. How the heck do you fund this pursuit?
Oh, that's actually a good question. And I know you don't want to have a lot of time. I was just talking to a person yesterday about that because they were looking at our cord. The cord stretched 2 feet. I told you about. Mike calls it the extension cord. It's like, thanks, Mike. It seems to like, but it's a beautiful car. Look it up. If you look up Chrysler cord, you'll see the car by any of you on the internet. 1937.
Yep.
I'm a school teacher. I don't have tons of money. What do you do? And
drugs. Please tell me it's drugs. It's drugs, isn't it?
It's Breaking Bad.
No. What it is the secret is going backwards in time. And that's what I was explaining to this person I was talking yesterday. The restoration shops are fantastic places to build beautiful cars. But the secret of what we do is our goal in restoration is to make them better than they were in period. And luckily, I've met most of the people. Miropal and I were talking about that a couple of weeks ago. Better than made in period. So we can use the same techniques. And we've done that. I've done, I think, 16 cars in 20 years, or it's either 24 cars, one of the two. We've got a whole site on what we've done. Because these cars, they didn't have convertible tops. Some of them didn't have doors. Most of them didn't have trunks. There's no radios in the cars. There's no air conditioning. We always take the wipers out. So basically, they're not the same fully functioned cars as trying to, like the 59 Caddy that we get a kick out of. God, I mean, that'd take you 50 grand, I'm sure probably more than 50,000 to restore with all that damn chrome. So these cars are simple, and you have to remember they're simple, and you have to approach them in simple ways, and sand them in simple ways, and mount them in simple ways. And we work, it's not a matter of saving money, it's a matter of keeping it simple. So if you can be pragmatic in your approach and look for simple ways to accomplish what they did in building them in the 50s, then you can control the costs. Probably it costs maybe 20 to 30,000 to restore one of these, which is still sizable, but nothing like it would be to restore another car. That's if you control all the costs and do it yourself. There's no chrome on these cars if you look at any of them, not even on the Ferber. There's some of the ones that are outliers out there. So the idea is if you can do this yourself and restore yourself and work with individuals, usually one-person shops, you can come up with practical ways to control costs, and you can even bring it under that $20,000 to $30,000 level. I don't know if that helps you. That makes sense, I hope.
Makes perfect sense.
Kind of takes me back to the 80s, the late 80s, when everybody I went to high school with was searching for that Carmen Ghia, and everybody had a shop in their carport.
Yeah, well, I've got a shop here, and we got a couple shops, and then I've used restoration shops, and they're wonderful, but they tend to want to do a perfect job, and that will take 3 to 5 years, and they'll go into 6 figures. And you hear my cat just saying hello to me.
Yes.
Jealous out talking. So, if you jump on the website, what's more fun right now for all of you, if you jump on Facebook, I think, or Instagram. In the last few days, Mike has been posting on everything on our Undiscovered Classic pages. So I don't know how many you've done today. I think 2 or 3 pictures.
And the YouTube channel. There'll be a lot of content from this trip on the YouTube channel in the coming weeks and months.
In the last week or so, we've been moving about 30 or 40 cars. We're kind of setting up for the next 10 years. And you can see the variety of stuff that's out there. And some of it is restored, some of it's unrestored, some of it's being restored, and some of it's finding new homes too. So
it's very cool. Mike and Geoff, thank you for being our guest today. I'm going to do our questions real quick before we wrap. Also realizing that we never did ask a trivia question, so we may have to save that for our next episode, perhaps, since we're almost at an hour now. So quick question. Number one, I'm going to ask this one of Mike. Mike, what is your dream car?
This is always a tough one. Can I give you my top 5? Because I can't really pick out of the top 5.
Absolutely.
Or is that not allowed? All right, great.
You can do it. Yeah, do it.
Okay. Glasspar G2, Victress S1, Victress C3, Ladawri Conquest, and a Grantham Stardust.
Wow. All these very unique, very specific, nothing mass produced.
No.
That's crazy. That's
you can
great.
go buy one of those anywhere. Who cares?
Yeah. That's very cool. Geoff, my question for you is, where's your next road trip going to be?
Well, we're going to Pebble Beach in 5 weeks. So it's not a road trip. We usually drive. So Pebble Beach, and it's hard. It's expensive there. I mean, it's expensive for me. It's expensive for anyone. But if anyone's going, we're going to have a forum that we're speaking at, and we're talking all about dream cars of the 50s, and that's on August 17th. And I think Pebble Beach, and Mike's going as too. Is the concourse is on the 20th. So to see all the cars that we're presenting, and none of mine, except they were mine, kind of getting out there. There's a number of cars, the Le Mans Coupe, the Maverick, 1953 Maverick, 1958 Le Mans Coupe, 1955 Debonair, and 1952 Manta Ray. They're all debuting for the first time at Pebble Beach. And
Very
they're beautiful.
Yeah.
Where I do have a road trip set up. I found a La Sierra in Mississippi that I'm trying to round up enough money so I can buy and bring it back. So that's not too far.
Sure.
I've got a road trip in 2 weeks in 30 seconds. I'm flying to Arkansas for one of my top 5 cars, a Glasspar G2 that was built in era, taken apart for restoration, bagged and tagged meticulously, but not put back together. And I'm renting a 20-foot U-Haul truck and throwing all of it in there and driving back to Buffalo over the course of 3 days in 2 weeks.
Awesome. That is very cool.
Nice.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see who gets this one. Mike gets this one. What's the most fascinating thing you've either seen on the road or in someone's garage?
Oh God. I mean, with everything I've seen here at Geoff's place, it's like a feast of fascination every time he opens up a garage door or we go out to the farms. Gosh, that's really tough. It'd be really hard to limit it to any one car that he's got here. It's just, you kind of like dream of places like this or opening up that garage door and finding something special. Here it's a daily occurrence. I mean, it's like the candy land of unique and amazing cars.
Yep, that's very cool. Geoff, my parting question for Geoff is, what's the best type of cheese?
Best type of what?
Cheese.
No idea.
What? Sacrilege.
The best type I'm not a food guy. I eat all food. I'm an equal opportunity provider of whatever's in front of me.
Mike, what is the best type of cheese, Mike?
Rudy's blue cheese.
No hesitation at all, man. Just boom, Rudy's.
I'd be beautiful and thin, but blue cheese will keep me round for life. I can't put it down.
You have to admire someone who has a swift and firm opinion on cheese and
a specific brand.
Exactly.
Yes. Mike, you're part of my tribe.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
So since Mike took that question, here's Geoff's question. If you were Geoff, if you were interested with no explanation, what would your friends and family assume you had done?
If I was what?
If you were arrested with no explanation, what would your friends and family assume you had done?
I think they would say, "What is it this time?"
Nice. All right. Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, what is it this time? Hey, there is, I don't know, if your readers go or listeners go into YouTube, they'll find something called the Sunflower-State-Speedster. It's one of America's oldest hot rod. We pulled it out of a river in Texas, and we've been restoring it. They might find that story interesting too. We have one of America's oldest hot rods too.
Wow, very cool.
It sounds like discontinuous, but that's a good visual story for people to see on YouTube, and it's on our channel or Discovery as well. And they can have a blast just shaking their heads on why we would do stuff like this.
I can't wait to check it out. Sunflower State. What was it called? Sunflower State Speeder.
Sunflower State Speedster. Yeah,
Speedster.
And there's a lot more story too. But it's
yep.
It's all of. If I were to leave you with one theme of what we do, it's all about the stories. And when we can't connect a story to a car, I feel like I've failed. I work really hard at doing that, and we're success with a lot of work. Sometimes it takes years to do it. But with the Sunflower State Speedster, we went out and found the family who built it and all the original pictures and all the original stories. And it's probably one of my favorite stories. And we're about 2/3 done with the restoration of that car. COVID slowed some things down for us, like it did everyone. So
sure. I can't wait to check it out. The website is undiscoveredclassics.com. Mike, Geoff, thank you for being our guest today. For our listeners, thank you for hanging with us and dealing with our inadvertent hiatus. We will have another episode for you next week. In the meantime, we all hope you're staying safe and cool and dry out there. Be careful on the roads. See you later. Take care, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.